Welcome back, everybody, to Post Wrestling. A very special guest joining us today on the show. He is the current Senior Vice President of Development at Seven Bucks Productions and a former head writer at WWE, working at the company from 1999 until 2015. Now the author of the book, There's Just One Problem, True Tales from the former, one-time, seventh most powerful person in WWE. It is our pleasure to welcome Brian Gewirtz to Post Wrestling. Brian, how are you doing today?
Good, John. Thanks for having me.
I have to say, as somebody that when we book guests and we always try to put a nice graphic together, you are a very elusive graphic to find. You have had a very private profile for someone in such a prominent position throughout your career. But now it seems like you are coming out and doing the whole media gauntlet now to promote your book. This is kind of your highest, like, in front of the camera exposure we've seen in your career.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. There was, I thought I had done a pretty good job of, remaining hidden. And then we had a $7 show on BET that we were able to speak at a function. And there was one still of me that I hate more than life itself, where I'm pontificating something and looking up and, looking like just the biggest a-hole in the world. And that's basically the one that's now, hopefully it will be different with the book and everything. And now the book has a picture section that took a lot of compiling and looking through, lots of files and stuff to find enough pictures to put in the picture section. But yeah, this is definitely a new experience.
Is this aspect of sort of going out, putting out the book, but then also the media that comes with it? Is this kind of outside of your comfort zone? Are you enjoying this during the early process of the promotional side of the book, which sometimes is as much heavy lifting as the actual writing of the book?
Yeah. It's definitely a different experience for me as someone who's never done anything like this before. But I also, at the very least, have gotten more than a glimpse of what Dwayne Johnson has to do to promote a movie, and traveling to different countries and doing press day and content day, where you're doing all these different, ancillary type of, stuff for ESPN and for Discovery and all these type of things. So, obviously compared to one of the biggest movie stars in the world, this is, this puts me in a good spot because it's yeah, I guess it's a lot on the surface, but it's really nothing to compare to what actors promoting a movie have to do.
One of the things that I think is evident in some of the best biographies, period, is when that voice really comes off of the page. And I found that not only was this a book just full of so many interesting stories, but written in such an entertaining way. I think it came across, even as just looking at the title of the book, you do not come off as someone that takes yourself all that seriously in an industry where there's plenty of people that do. Has that kind of always been sort of your attitude towards this, or is that a trait you've acquired, sort of understanding the silliness of this world that you are a major factor in?
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's always, it sort of has to be, that kind of has to be your attitude as a writer coming into WWE, because it will humble you pretty quickly. There have been a lot of writers that have come and gone, some successful there, some not, who are have a certain set of expectations, especially coming from the Hollywood world where the writer is king, especially on television. And then all of a sudden it's who the hell is this person? And, JBL, I'm not going to bother to remember your name. You'll be gone in a week, or whatever, he'd say to even Freddie Prinze Jr., who was on the team and is a passionate wrestling fan. And then, JBL would be like, hey, Scooby-Doo, what are you doing here? That kind of thing. It's it is a very humbling place. And you could, either complain about it and get into, get in your own head, or you could just kind of run with it. And Freddie, by the way, did that too. He was no ego at all when it came to, working backstage there. And that really, there have been people who haven't been able to do that. So it's really one of those things where, if you know what's good for you, because at the end of the day, you're not taking bumps and you're asking people to take bumps, especially when writing shows. You really can't get too full of yourself because you really don't have a leg to stand on when it's okay, well, why don't you do it then if it's so easy type of thing.
you're also coming into this company. It's November of 1999, a very different system in place than today. And as someone that is not an ex-wrestler, not coming from within the industry, how long of a process was it for you to sort of feel that you were welcomed in this world? Was that, a several year long process? What was that? Because it's a very, very tiny writing staff at that point in 1999.
Yeah. And I mean, and when I started, there was just me and Tommy Blacha. That was Tommy Blacha had just started himself. He had come over from Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Russo and Ferrara had left to go to WCW in October of 99. So that's what kind of precipitated the events of me starting. And yeah, there was definitely, individually, there was like friendships getting, forged and, people accepting you sooner than other people. But it really, I would say after I went through Wrestler's Court in 2001, which is like the first chapter of the book, that's kind of when, the fact that I kind of like made it through that and didn't either quit or break down crying afterwards, I think led to a certain acceptance of like, okay, he understands that we wouldn't have taken him to Wrestler's Court. And Wrestler's Court, to backtrack for a second, is this kind of kangaroo court system within the annals of wrestling history that if you commit a locker room infraction or a road infraction or something like that, you're taken before the wrestlers by the wrestlers, with Undertaker as the judge and JBL as the prosecutor and Kane as the bailiff. And it was a pretty jarring experience, but at the same time, having every talent in the locker room there, many of them testifying against you as far as all the stuff that you've done in violation of, wrestling locker room code and that kind of thing. There's a little sense of like, yes, we're all putting this in front of you, but we wouldn't be doing this if we thought you would just be gone tomorrow. We wouldn't put the effort in to doing something like this. So we're kind of doing this because we see something in you and we want to like put you on a right track. I didn't feel that way at the time. At the time, I felt like the most dramatic experience of my professional career. But, in hindsight, and not soon after that, hindsight, it wasn't like years later, it was like literally days later where I came to that realization of, you know what, maybe there's a little bit of acceptance going on here.
At around that same time, 2001, 2002, and this relationship is explored heavily in the book. But in terms of one central character that I think many people link yourself to is Paul Heyman. How would you describe that relationship at that time in 2001, 2002?
So, yeah, I think I made the analogy in the book of it's that old Warner Brothers cartoon of the coyote and the sheepdog punching into work and then going through cartoonishly, cartoonish fights and raising pure hell against each other. And then checking out, good night, Sam, like that kind of thing. We were, as Paul said at the time when he came in, he was like, I was hired to fight with you. We're meant to be fighting with each other. And, it's kind of like to make a Lost analogy, man of science versus man of faith type, two very similar and also two very different people. But the thing with Paul that, even though that we were always, at times literally screaming at each other. And I am not a screamer by trade. He's really the only person I ever really found myself in that situation with. But it was this very unique situation where as much as we were like kind of at each other's throats and fighting, I never really disliked him. Mm-hmm. It was always like, it's like The Wire. It's like, this is just part of the game. It's just, you accept it as, I don't know if, Stephanie McMahon having to control both of us, saw it as a, part of the game and that type of thing. I think she was like, you're two adults, grow the fuck up. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse or not.
Oh, floor is yours. Yes.
But there was a lot of, thankfully not literal headbutting, but, mental headbutting. One time, as documented in the book, there was a little bit of a George and Jerry slapping, almost come to fisticuffs type of thing. That was the outlier, though. We both got suspended for a week with pay. So it all worked out in the end. But, yeah, it was one of those things. You go through the wars with somebody like that, and then
Yeah.
just the mutual respect kind of develops on the other side. So when I see Paul now, it's, nothing but big hug and laughs and just like overall good times and good feelings. And all of it's genuine. I feel the same way, about him that he does about me now, which is, it's truly great to see him.
At least at that iteration of Paul Heyman 20 years ago, was he just an oil and water type of fit for this creative staff? Was just a system he could not kind of maneuver around and understand the dynamics at play, or were there elements that he was a perfect fit at that time?
Well, yeah, I would say a little bit of both. From a creative standpoint, his ideas, a lot of his ideas were really good. His the company culture part of it, that's where I think he had to have the biggest adjustment, because he was like the boss at ECW, and he was the one, the people were people needed answers from him, and he was answering to no one. And now you get in this situation where you are not the boss anymore, and you've got to answer to Vince, and in some cases you got to answer to Stephanie, and be deferential to talent and that type, and work with others, which is something like, that I think ECW, Paul, I kind of took pride in being rebelling against, the machine, so to speak. So when he was in that environment, I would say, yeah, it was, a little bit of an adjustment. That's like the low key version of it. Kind of, I don't know, to use the John Mulaney horse in the hospital, analogy. There's a little bit of that too.
When it came to sort of Vince McMahon overseeing this writing staff, and seeing the two of you that were very much, you on the Raw side, Paul on the SmackDown side, yet you two both had to coexist, helping one another while at the same time, being somewhat opposite to each other. Did he kind of foster this, and did he like to see this kind of rivalry between these two that would fight for their ideas? Like, what was sort of the culture that Vince McMahon thrust upon the writing staff and what he expected?
I think he liked the healthy competition with each other, to a point.
Right.
Yes, the competition with each other, when it's kind of what, propelled WWE in the Monday Night Wars against WCW. I think it would have, you could argue that in the mid 90s, before Nitro came out, WWE was a little complacent in their characters, and then kind of forced to change for the better in the late 90s. I think the same thing with Paul and I, especially when you split the rosters. Now, there's a little bit, and again, I get into this a little bit, like there's a little bit of, yes, they're against each other in the sense of Raw and SmackDown, but there's also, they're each working, Paul was doing commentary, I think. And if not, he was still the same as me as far as going to both shows. Yeah. Working on individual promos on both shows. I would work, with the same, Edge, Angle, Rock, and everything on SmackDown, even though I was the Raw guy, because that's how.
Which I don't think people realize, the fact, like, this was not like separate writing staffs. Like, you might have been heading up Raw, but you're still contributing to the other's program at the time. So it's still like this intermingling of writers on each brand at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And Paul was doing the same with like RVD and people that he would work with on Raw. So yeah, it wasn't a clear split. I think at a certain point, and again, I write about it in the book, when we were on the corporate jet, and yes, the red wine was flowing and what have you, even though I wasn't partaking. And I don't know if Paul was either, but Paul, I must have said something very, very sarcastic, wise ass-ish. Whatever I said, and it probably got a laugh on the plane, and that prompted Paul to say, I will give you 5 free punches to the face if I could just have one to yours. And that's when Shane then took me into the bathroom of the corporate plane and is teaching me how to throw a punch and take my stance correctly. And, I think it was a very amusing thing at the time. I didn't take him up on it ultimately. But I think it was afterwards, that's when we got our talk of like, yeah, this whole competition thing is good to a certain extent, but you guys also need to show a semblance of professionalism, at the workplace and on the plane.
To anyone that is listening to this that maybe is not like deep in the weeds of all of this stuff, like I don't imagine if I was interviewing Shonda Rhimes that she would be describing such an incident on the company corporate jet. But it to me, WWE has to be unlike any kind of writer's room you've been a part of, any company that you've been a part of. Is it just so far removed from the norm that this is something that just, it operates under its own weird bylaws and wrestler's court, and it's just a world unto itself. It very much is like almost Lord of the Flies within the entertainment industry to some.
Well, I would say certainly from, late 90s to 2010-ish, maybe that would apply. I think almost 95% of the stuff that I write about in terms of my experiences at WWE, I don't think any of that would be plausible today in 2022. And that's from in some respects, that's a lot for the better. In a little, kind of weird respects, maybe for the worse. But really, like, these are the type of things. It is much more, it has evolved like anything else. There's a lot more writers now. There's a lot more organization now. There's a lot more, the shows themselves are prepared much, much earlier now than they were back then. And there's a certain, there's a certain expectation that comes with being on the writers team that, like, you're part of a team. I think it's slowly morphing its way closer to what I remember, at least working on sitcoms, even if it's not exactly, it can never be, because just the nature of the beast and the live shows, 2 hours a week in a different city every single week, not including pay-per-views, that's going to make it unique than anything else on television. But yeah, it is not the same, all that stuff, the adventures of me and Paul. Forgive me, this happens every podcast I do. I'm working on the Upper East Side of New York City. There's always a 5-alarm fire happening somewhere. And
it's okay. You're used to putting fires out, so it's it adds to the atmosphere.
So yeah, I think I think yes, to an extent, it is a little bit of like its own entity, but it's nothing like it was like 10, 15 years ago.
So I know that you are probably going to be asked about the subject quite a lot in the whole promotion of this book, but we are at such a intriguing time in WWE where for the first time in its existence you don't have Vince McMahon at the wheel, and this is not him tearing 2 quads and he's at home and there's a return date in mind. This is Vince removed from it, and I'm just curious if you're looking at a WWE without Vince McMahon, at just your belief of how this drastically adjusts the creative process, the preparation for the show, and what were some of the attributes that, taking Vince McMahon away, that he no longer is there to provide for this staff and this oversight of the company?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's uncharted waters. It's very, it's a truly, truly fascinating time, and there's been plenty of times where you could say, oh, this is a fascinating time because Austin's retired, or this is a fascinating time because like John Cena has gone to go do movies and stuff like that. This is a game changer unlike any other time in WWE history. And obviously from, and I could just strictly speak from a creative writing team standpoint,
right?
From that respect, yes, you're losing, like, Vince's obviously wealth of knowledge and his, instincts, because that's really like his instincts when it comes down to certain pay-per-views and characters and matches and that kind of thing. He doesn't bat 1,000, and I don't always necessarily even agree with him when I was there, but they are really second to none. I mean, he does have that sharpness, having done it for so long and having, crafted it. But at the same time, it's so exciting also to now, you take that element out, and, the shows have been funneled through one person. And Vince it's not in his DNA to do anything half-assed. He doesn't get a script, take a look and say, yeah, go ahead and do it. He will sit down and we go over it with a fine-tooth comb. So the fact that now you have that element taken out, and people pitching and not necessarily pitching in the, okay, I want to pitch something that the audience will love, but I also know I have to fit, Vince's specifics in terms of what he likes and what I know he will accept and what he won't accept. It's like, that's all of a sudden, having been the standard way of doing things for whatever it was, over 40 years, that's now gone. So it's kind of like Wild West in a good way, as far as like, who knows now what, if Paul Levesque, if his tastes are going to be the same as Vince's. I'm sure there aren't, because nobody has the same, you take the lessons and you take like the knowledge and that type of thing, and you try to instill as much of it as you can that you've taken away from Vince. But at the same time, he's not there, and you need to put on a show, and the show goes on every night, every Monday, every Friday, every pay-per-view. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to watch. And I think there's going to be a little bit of like, putting the circumstances aside, if I was a writer there, I would be like truly kind of excited and invigorated by the possibilities now that just like, having a different perspective and a different person to pitch to and a different, just everything, kind of provides you.
Do you feel that was, going back again to the very first brand split, was that needed at the time? Like, would you have preferred, we do have separate writing staffs and there was some autonomy placed where, or is it was just not in Vince McMahon's DNA to take his hands off and give that level that would truly create two very distinct visions that are separate from one another, that aren't under one kind of creative umbrella?
Yeah, like you never, I was saying I was like the head writer or lead writer of Raw and Paul the lead writer of SmackDown, but Vince was the lead writer of all of it. And yeah, there's never truly going to be that like, go ahead and run with it type of thing. As long as you were pitching to somebody else who could accept easily 11 segments of Raw as easily as he can reject them. And it's his right to do so because it's his show. But, at the time, the brand split, yeah, like I got it. I understood the reason behind it because we were burning out a lot of talent. We were burning out a lot of storylines as far as like, I remember just as a fan because, I started on SmackDown episode, I think 6. And I remember like those first 6 weeks when SmackDown was on the air, even I was like, all right, this is too much. This is too much to follow. I can't devote 4 hours a week to WWE and that type of thing. So yeah, there was like a certain, like we're going too fast. We're not elevating enough people because, and we got to get the highest rating possible. And we got to like, your default mode is put on the established stars and everything. So there are a lot of people like kind of falling by the wayside who aren't getting as much TV time as they should. So at the time, yeah, it was seen as this is going to slow things down. So even if you're watching both shows, that's great. But you don't have to follow the storylines for 4 hours a week, every week. You get to like hopefully see some new characters emerge and new talents emerge that you didn't necessarily get to see before. You didn't get to see like, and it would be necessary to feature them obviously, but like now, in a post brand split world, Eddie Guerrero can shine and Rob Van Dam can shine and Booker T could shine, and the women's division can shine. Less so, when it was just like we got to play the greatest hits on both shows every single week, and you saw that. You saw, especially when I was starting. I remember Triple H, Rock, and Mick Foley were being used on multiple segments, and sometimes like even multiple matches within a 2-hour show. And you got to stop the bleeding at some point. Like the negative of that, obviously, is all that sounds great, all that's really cool, but at the bottom line is, on Mondays, I want to see all my favorite stars. Where's Chris Jericho? Where's Kurt Angle? Where's The Rock? Where's Hulk Hogan, in 2002? Like, oh, they're all on SmackDown. Okay, well, I'll watch SmackDown. Where's Stone Cold Steve Austin? Where's The Undertaker? Where's Hall and Nash? There is that element of it where it's like, yes, I want some separation, but I also want to see a complete show. And I don't necessarily, not everyone has the patience, or the wherewithal or the time to, take that proverbial 2 steps back, 1 step back to take 2 steps forward type of thing. So yeah, it was mixed. Let's put it that way.
Just a few more questions here I had for you. Just wrapping things up on the Vince McMahon topic is, what do you think that this individual is filling his day with now? That it's just, he wakes up on that Saturday after the tweet goes out, you don't have a company to run all of a sudden. And do you feel that this is is this the last public chapter for Vince McMahon? Or do you feel that this is just inevitable, that he's going to find his next step if it is not WWE, it is going to be something else.
Honestly, it's one of the most fascinating unknowns I think there is, because this is, Vince, famously was the first to arrive, last to leave type guy, and it all starts with him. And WWE is his life and his passion, but also working is his passion. He is, as a WWE employee, I remember I got 4 weeks of vacation a year. I would savor whatever time on the weekend when I wasn't working on the show that I would have. Vince's mindset is one of, it's a, vacation. He didn't take vacations. He didn't. He's not a fan of sleep, because that's less hours you could be working and doing something. He is a driven individual who doesn't, maybe, with grandchildren and everything, there's that aspect of not working, family that you can embrace and sink your teeth into. But, let's just say, like, we'll obviously lead very different lives. He's not watching the Mets game. He's not prepping for his fantasy football draft this August, So I have no idea. I really don't. I just know that he is one that always loves to work and be in the moment, and not really, like, leisure time is not something that I've ever known of him to be a big fan of. So it's a truly great unknown. I have no idea.
One person I wanted to ask you about, because so little is known about this person, but he has been just a stalwart within this company for decades at this point. And when all of these changes were happening, and this was before they announced Paul Levesque overseeing creative, I did ask someone there about, in an ideal world, who oversees this thing? And the name that the person came back to me was Ed Koskey, who just sounds like he is a steady hand on the wheel. He has been there forever. Can you tell me anything about just Ed Koskey? Because he is someone that has, navigated this system, and has, generally, that's not the easiest system to navigate.
No, he's a rat bastard, and he needs to be stopped. I've always been against it. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably like one of my closest friends in wrestling. He's someone who, like, if you thought I was off the grid, as far as like social media and Google images and that type of thing,
no one could identify this guy. Yeah.
No, he's DB Cooper, and there's a reason for that. In that, like, he's focused on the job at hand. Like from a personal standpoint, he's as funny as anybody I've ever known, not just in the wrestling business, but in general. And he's a hard worker and a huge fan of wrestling. And I don't mean WWE, I mean wrestling, the territories and NWA and ECW and WCW and everything else. He was a writer's assistant for us, started in 2001. His first show, he had worked in the studio in Stamford for a few months earlier, but he started for us as a writer's assistant. And a lot of writer's assistants get into a pitfall, a trap immediately of, I have the opportunity, when the time is right, to contribute something. And I'm thinking so much about what I want to throw out and contribute, because you're kind of encouraged, like, hey, yeah, take the notes and do all your writer's assistant stuff. But if you have an idea, throw it out. A lot of people take that last part of it and, make it so much the focus that it affects the real part of it. So we used to go through a lot of writer's assistants. Ed, when he started, he was very savvy as far as knowing, like, yes, I'll have an idea and I'll say it when the time is right. But these guys need their notes. They need their lunches. They need, whatever they need, I'm going to give them. Again, he started 2001 at King of the Ring 2001, the infamous Shane versus Kurt Angle match, and Booker doing his run in on Steve. And so that was quite an introduction. But yeah, he rose up the ranks, and he's, dedicated his life, to writing into the company. And he's, always in writer's room, you want a good hang, like you want someone that's fun to hang out with and fun to drive with and tell stories with, and, go to the bar afterwards or what have you with. And Ed is about the easiest hang. I think, there's a lot of, you make a lot of friends, a lot of enemies in the wrestling business. I don't think anyone, wrestler, writer, production, has ever had a bad thing to say about Ed, and it's for a good reason.
All right. And my final question here, and I found this to be a theme throughout the book. And I'm somebody that when I'm not have a microphone in front of me, I consider myself a fairly introverted person. And I certainly got the sense that you were the same way. And here you are in a company where every last action is under a microscope, where sneezing can get you a bad rap. So I'm curious about if that was something that over time you kind of came out of your shell in WWE, or was it always something that it was very difficult to be around these larger than life personalities, and you're someone that would much rather just be in the shadows and not having a spotlight on you?
Yeah, well, I'm a sneezing son of a bitch now. I have no
just let them run now. Yeah,
just go with it. Yeah. But at the time, yeah, there was it took a lot to for me to come out of my shell, because like you know, introverted was almost considered a bad word. You know, I remember, you know, going through talent, and, you know, at one point, you know, he's an introvert. Ugh. You know, it's like, well, wait a minute. That's like half of us. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as, you know, the character, you can portray the character well. So yeah, it definitely, you know, I get into it in the book a lot, you know, just, you know, and that's kind of the through line of the book, really, is like, how do you, you know, have any sort of success and longevity as an introvert in a world in which, you know, being an extrovert is considered a major plus. And I would think that that would just apply to the talent, but it really applies to everybody backstage, because you need to be, you know, when you pitch your ideas, you need to have it with bravado and confidence. And you need to have a plan A as well as a plan B and C. And, you know, how do you react to when something gets rejected? You know, are you selling? Are you, you know, are you vocal about it? It really, it doesn't bode well in the beginning if you're hiding in the shadows and not immediately introducing yourself to everybody and shaking hands, stuff that would seem like, of course, that's what you do. But at the time, you know, for me, in my little, you know, cocoon and everything, like, I could get away with like a just nodding hello, right? That's not, you know, but it is different. So yeah, like it took like at least for me 2 to 3 years to truly understand the culture of wrestling and the, you know, the locker room things that are just, you're supposed to just know, because I didn't really have the benefit. And I will say this for Paul, that was one of the things that he, you know, and it kind of backfired when he testified in Wrestlers Court. But at the very least, he was like, no, you're nodding recognition. That's not the same as looking someone in the eye and shaking hands. That's what you need to be doing. And you need to be doing it with everybody, even if you've maybe even seen them earlier in the day at the hotel or in the car or whatever. That's very important. So yeah, there's a certain adjustment period, but thankfully, you know, I was able to come out on the other side of it.
All of this and more is covered in the book. It's out Tuesday, August the 16th. There's just one problem: true tales from the former one-time 7th most powerful person in WWE. There's so many great stories, and I will leave this as a cliffhanger for people. The story of Vince Russo's infamous meeting in June of 2002 and him pitching a match idea and the response that it was met with. I can't imagine how long you've been sitting on that one and waiting for the book, because it is an unbelievable story. And there's quite a number of these. And Brian, I really enjoyed this book. And I'm not just saying that because you were on here. I found you to be very forthcoming. You owned ideas that you felt were failures. You are very self-deprecating, and I think you could take a few more victory laps if you so chose. And just being in that system as long as you are, that takes an extreme skill set to navigate the rigors of WWE as you did. But I encourage people to check out the book, because it really stood out for me. And I think when everyone saw, wow, Brian Gewirtz is writing a book, it grabbed everyone's attention earlier this year.
No, thank you, John. I really, really appreciate that. You know, it's very exciting. It's like, it's just kind of surreal, the whole thing, to be honest, but I'm very excited about it. It's, you know, yeah, like you said, it comes out tomorrow, Amazon, all the regular places, local bookstores too. It's going to be, it's really cool to be able, you know, to get these stories out into the world and, you know, come out of my comfort zone and shell a little bit. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for this conversation. It was great.
All right, everybody. He is Brian Gewirtz. Go check out the book because I'm sure the podcast is going to be the next step for Brian Gewirtz, a media darling after this run. But that is going to wrap it up for us. So thanks to everybody for tuning in here